Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, world. Good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for coming into this live stream. We're going hard every day, trying to build, trying to develop, trying to grow, okay? And trying to also be ghetto as hell with the live stream on the phone so I can watch the chat. So anybody piling into the chat, let's get to it. We're going to build real heavy today. I got a lot of classes today. I got a lot of work to do today. So this stream might only be an hour. I know it seems like lately I've been going in for like 2 hours, something like that. Trust me, I'm trying to keep it concise, but there's a lot of information to get to. So I hope you catch this on the playback. We're going to start right now. So today is September 20th, 2023. It's about 1 p.m. where I am here in Budapest, Hungary. And today we're going to be talking about China investing in Africa and anti Black racism in China and what we need to do to think about the future of Africa. Now, once again, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I am not an African. I am a Black person of African descent. I acknowledge that. But I acknowledge my Black American heritage and I cherish that. And I do not do that to be divisive or to segregate myself from Africans, but I do care a lot about what happens in Africa. Why is this important for Black people to always be concerned about what happens in Africa? Because a stable Africa, a place that Africa thrives and succeeds in, is a place for us in the future, possibly. I've been to Africa, I've been to Kenya, been to Tanzania, been to Tunisia, been to Mauritius, and there is a lot to love about Africa, but there is still a lot more that needs to be done. And as Black people, we need to always be connected to what is happening on the continent to make sure that we are, at least for us in the diaspora, doing our best to try to help the advancement and growth of Africa, right? So let's get to it. I know a lot of people suck at geography. That's why I always pull up a map at the very beginning of our live streams, these chats we have. So today we're talking about Tanzania. All right. Tanzania is this country right here next to this big island. I wish I could write on the screen like I'm in Zoom, like I'm in one of my classes. But Tanzania is this country. Now, Tanzania is this country right here. Sorry, this is Mozambique, and this is Tanzania, and this is Kenya, right? Tanzania is right here. I wish you could see the name. I pulled up this map and it looked like it was going to be good. Let's try to refresh that page. Yeah, still can't see it. Anyway, you get the idea. Tanzania is right here, large country towards the center of Africa on the east coast. China is, of course, right here. I know this might seem silly for some of you, but trust me, there are a lot of people in the world that suck at geography. They couldn't point to their own country on a world map. So, China has been doing a lot of investment in Africa over the past few years. Many people have been encouraging this development because China is pouring billions of dollars into infrastructure and roads and bridges and schools and hospitals and that sort of thing. But China is also investing in the leadership of Africa, giving money to African leaders and trying to train the next generation of African warlords and dictators. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in Africa right now are that there is a lot of anti-neocolonial sentiment, which is true. But instead of toppling the foreign companies that extract billions of dollars from Africa, they'd rather topple the democratically elected leaders in Niger, in Mali, in Guinea, et cetera, et cetera. Gabon is a different story, I would argue. But still, nonetheless, I believe that there are other means to create change rather than just overthrowing leaders. Before we get to this article from Axios, which is very interesting, titled "In Tanzania, Beijing is Running a Training School for Authoritarianism," we're going to first talk about the anti Black racism in China. And let's get to that. All right. By the way, I got the live chat going. I see people are in here. So if you want to leave a comment, if you want to send me a message, let's get to it. But this is an article from Al Jazeera. China urged to tackle online racism targeting Black people. Human Rights Watch says racist tropes common across Chinese social media and that platforms and government must act. This was published on August 17th, 2023. Human Rights Watch has found racist content targeting Black people is becoming increasingly prevalent on China's social media platforms, where it is being used to attract traffic and generate profit. The rights group reviewed hundreds of videos and posts from 2021 on platforms including Weibo, a short messaging app, and Douyin, the Chinese TikTok, and said it found that content often portrayed black people through offensive racial stereotypes, which is unacceptable. Pardon, I got a cough. Mm, absolutely unacceptable. You know, from being a black person traveling around the world, one thing I've noticed constantly is that wherever we go in the world, they have a racial slur for us or derogatory views and stereotypes about us. And that needs to stop because, number one, black people have not done anything to anybody on this planet. We didn't colonize China. We didn't rape Chinese women. We didn't do any of that. But still, they have negative perceptions of us. And that needs to stop. And it starts online. Let's go. Such material was also found on the video sharing platform Bilibili live stream and Bilibili live stream and video app Kawashio and social media and e-commerce site Zhao Hongshu, it said, noting that the companies had failed to deal with it. The amount and extremity of racist content on the Chinese internet suggests that the platforms either are not meeting their own standards, banning racist content, or that their policies are inadequate when addressing racist content, both contrary to their human rights responsibilities, the report said. Human Rights Watch noted that influencer videos depicting black Africans as primitive or dependent on Chinese people as their saviors were particularly widely shared, while black people who married Chinese were accused in online posts of contaminating and threatening the Chinese race. Chinese in relationships with black people, meanwhile, were accused of being traitors. I want you to think about this before people say, well, black people need to stop being sensitive or these sorts of comments don't mean anything. Do you think China would let this happen if rampantly on Chinese social media they were talking about the small hats, Jewish people? Once again, on my channel, I have no problem with Jewish people at all, but I'm using this example. If they were on Chinese social media talking about the Jews and all of the negative stereotypes that are very prevalent about Jewish people, do you think China would just let that pass? No, there will be condemnation around the world about that. But because they're making fun of black people, people that seem to be powerless, people that seem to not be able to fight back and attack back when they're getting these derogatory terms and images created about them, it's okay. It's fine. But that's not fine. And these same Chinese people who are sending these racist memes and racist messages back and forth about black people, laughing at images of black people, are the same ones who say China can't be racist because they invest billions of dollars into Africa every year. Let's go. The Chinese government likes to tout China Africa anti colonial solidarity and unity, but at the same time ignores pervasive hate speech against black people on the Chinese internet. Wakui Wang, senior China researcher at Human Rights Watch, said in a statement Beijing should reconsider that undertaking investments in Africa and embracing China Africa friendship won't undo harm caused by unaddressed racism. And yes, there is harm by spreading hate messages online because, number one, you don't know who these messages are being shared by, and you don't know who these messages are going to. Imagine, if you will, you went to work one day and you looked on your boss's computer somehow, some way, on his monitor, and he had racist images of black people on them, and you are a black employee. How would you feel? How would you feel if you were going into a job interview? Or if you were trying to go to China to work, and then you find out when you look in the elevator, let's say you're sitting in an elevator next to the Chinese guy who's going to do your interview, and he accidentally has some racist black imagery on his phone. What I'm saying is these sorts of jokes, these sorts of stereotypes, these sorts of images and memes that are negative towards us should not be accepted and tolerated at all, because they don't do this about Jewish people. They don't do this about other groups of white people. They don't do this about other groups of people. But it's okay to pick on black people online, and that's wrong. So let's continue. Accusations of racism against Africans also emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic when some were forced out of their apartments and singled out for quarantine, prompting rare criticism from African leaders. Some African residents said they had been the target of everyday racism and xenophobia long before that, with state media and adverts deploying blackface and racial caricatures. Human Rights Watch noted most Chinese social media platforms have community standards and guidelines that ban content promoting racial or ethnic hatred and discrimination. It said Bilibili, Kuashio, Weibo, and Zhao Hongshu did not respond to letters questioning the racist content and urged the platforms, which quickly removed content critical of the government, to take down videos and posts that violate community standards on hate speech or might incite racial discrimination or violence. ByteDance Billions owner removed one video after it was flagged by Human Rights Watch, but took no action against a number of others concerning a black child, stating that the depiction was not necessarily associated with any certain group or race. Let's keep it real. China is able, if they want to, because they control their internet with an iron fist. And so we can't take this excuse that China is unable to remove all the racist content that's anti-black on their platforms. Let's keep it real. China has the iron curtain, the red curtain over the internet, the red firewall, whatever they call it, and they're able to monitor heavily. You can't even post Winnie the Pooh on Weibo. You don't think they can stop people using the N-word or racial slurs that they have in their language regarding black people, or people doing blackface and that sort of thing? It is very possible. Let's continue building. Douyin added that it had a combination of people and technology to enforce content moderation guidelines, and that it on average takes action on more than 300 videos and comments per day that include violative content targeting black people. That's not enough. 300 videos in a country full of billions of people, where millions of people are online at a time, sharing and sending messages. 300 videos or 300 comments a day is a drop in the bucket. That's not stopping anything. Human Rights Watch said Chinese in interracial relationships with black people were often the target of online abuse, with women being threatened with rape, death, and doxing, publishing personally identifiable information without the individual's consent. This is something that I deal with all the time on my channel. In my comment section, I have threats against my wife all the time, and I instantly, automatically block those people, delete those people, and I don't let those people get any shine on my platform. I don't let them try to antagonize me or hurt me or go back and forth with them in the comments. So I know for a fact it has to be happening in China, a country with not a lot of black people and with this closed-minded mentality, because my American ass posting on this English speaking YouTube channel gets racist comments all the time, attacks all the time, people threatening to do horrible things to me or my wife, death threats, all sorts of stuff. And I wonder sometimes why YouTube doesn't do more to try to stop that sort of messaging from happening from people. Like, how can YouTube allow these sorts of messages to even pop into my comment section? And that's not right. But let's continue building. It noted the prevalence of posts calling on the government to ban black people from becoming permanent residents in China or from marrying Chinese people. Some also adopted racist symbols and language frequently used in the United States in their online posts, while some called for them to be killed. Wow. Chinese who condemned the racism or provided support to victims of racism were also targeted, it added, noting that Beijing maintains one of the world's most sophisticated internet censorship regimes through the so-called Great Firewall. It urged the government to do more to tackle the problem and take steps to promote tolerance and fight prejudice. Major Chinese social media platforms are failing to fulfill their own guidelines to address pervasive racist content, Wang said. Chinese authorities should stop facilitating this toxic environment. Absolutely, they should, and they have the capability to do it. But unfortunately, we live in a world where anti-black racism, poking fun, making fun of black people is okay, and it's not okay. And China might try to send the image to the world that they're doing great good for Africa, but by just sending billions of dollars in loans to these African nations. But behind closed doors, what are Chinese people calling us? Black devils and all sorts of racial slurs and that sort of thing. But more importantly, let's get to this. Let's get to the main article for today. In Tanzania, Beijing is running a training school for authoritarianism. This is from Axios, written by Bethany Allen Ibrahiman. So, this story, part of a series supported by the Pulitzer Center, is a joint investigation between Axios and Danish newspaper Politiken. So, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The Chinese Communist Party is teaching African leaders its authoritarian alternative to democracy at its first overseas training school. The strongest evidence yet that Beijing is exporting its model of governing in its push to challenge the Western led world order. Now, in the world of geopolitics, countries are always going to try to use money and influence to try to sway countries to get on their side, especially if they're countries like China or Russia that have geopolitical interests that might be contrary to that of the West or the rest of the world in that case. And so, my opinion about communism is this: I don't identify as a communist, but if I were to write all my ideals and my beliefs on a piece of paper, it would probably align more with the communists or socialists than any other group, period. But I do not think the Chinese Communist Party is the great representation of communism today, right? For example, in China, there is no such thing as universal health care, meaning you do have to pay to go to the hospital and that sort of thing. So that's one thing that I believe any sane communist believes that the state should provide: universal health care, universal housing, and that sort of thing. When it comes to democracy and the Western model and that sort of thing, I do think an argument can be made that Western style democracy does not have a place in Africa. I don't agree with that fully, but I am against the idea that authoritarianism, like what exists in China, is a better alternative, because I don't think even uh, people who are sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party today want to live in communist China. There are very, very few people that emigrate to China for the system, for ideological reasons, because I think most people realize that it is very authoritarian, very restrictive, and it's not something that permits freedom and free expression and that sort of thing. And for Black people, especially in the continent, what I want are the freedom of expression, social liberties, and that sort of thing. I also want the social safety net for people as well. And I don't believe the Chinese Communist Party ticks all of those boxes: liberties, civil liberties, and social safety nets for people, and that sort of thing. And where I'll end there. So let's go. Why it matters. The Mwalimu Julius Nyerere Leadership School in Tanzania is Beijing's counter to efforts by the U.S. and other Western countries to shape African politics in a fight for influence on a continent rich in raw materials and energy. At the school, the CCP teaches how it fuses the ruling political party and the state, marking a clear departure from Beijing's previous, more subtle attempts to peddle influence on the international stage. Culti- Cultivating an authoritarian friendly political bloc could help China reshape global institutions and guarantee markets as Western sanctions seek to isolate certain Chinese industries. Such a bloc would also help the CCP deflect criticism for its human rights record and gain international support for its core interests, such as its territorial claims in the South China Sea. So, once again, why is this important for anybody watching? Why is this important? What's happening in Africa, even if we're from the diaspora, even if we're not Tanzanian, hell, even if you're not Black? It's because you, I truly believe that China's authoritarian model is not helpful for the advancement of Black people as a whole, right? I don't see a society with security cameras everywhere, face recognition devices in the streets, a one party state ruled that cannot be questioned, where they can censor information, where the internet can be controlled and monitored, and that sort of thing. I don't think that's the future that we want for our people. And I believe that all Black people should be concerned about what happens in Africa, because it should be a place in the future where we can all gain refuge and safety from this white supremacist world. But if we have other outside forces sending ideologies and methods of governing that are not conducive to a free and stable and safe society, what do we have to go back to, right? That's what I'm saying here. That's why it's important. So, Chinese and African government officials and Chinese state media have presented the school as a way to promote Africa's economic and social development, and they've cast the CCP's approach there as a way to alleviate poverty and spur economic development through training effective leaders. But behind the school's closed doors, Economics takes a back seat to political training. Chinese teachers sent from Beijing train African leaders that the ruling party should sit above the government and the courts, and the fierce discipline within the party can ensure adherence to party ideology. Axios and Danish newspaper Politiken learned as the first Western news outlets to visit the school. Very interesting way of governing. Usually, at least from my understanding, in governments, you have a government, but then you have parties that rule, or that fight for rule, or fight for influence in that government. But in the Chinese system, they have the party above the government. The party dictates to the government, and that's what they're trying to send to these new African leaders, right? Once again, here's a map of Africa for anybody who doesn't know. Here's Tanzania right here, right below Kenya. I visited Tanzania. There were some things I liked about it, some things I didn't. What I really liked about Tanzania is the pizza and all the niash that you see walking around. It was good to see beautiful black people from all stripes in Tanzania. But what I didn't like was the rampant corruption, all the cheating. Every time you walk in Tanzania, people are trying to cheat you and rip you off and that sort of thing. Let's continue building. All right. Through interviews with African officials who have participated in or observed the training, Axios and Politiken found evidence that the school's program contradicts CCP officials' repeated assertion and many scholars' views that Beijing isn't exporting its authoritarian model for governing. There's been a reluctance from a lot of scholars to say that China is clearly trying to export authoritarianism, said Daniel Mattingly, an assistant professor of political science at Yale University, whose research focuses on authoritarian politics in China. It's remarkable, he said, that there are students who leave the school with the perception that we need to move to a much stronger one party state model. And I don't believe this is what we want. We don't want to see freedom taken away from people. People should have the right to question the government. People should have the right to form political blocs different than the ruling party. People should be able to self express how they feel. And I don't think we want to see in Africa with one party state, one party rule over governments, just like how we don't want to see in Africa run by warlords and coup leaders and young men in military fatigues. So let's go here. How it works: educating ruling parties on cementing their control. The CCP has held an exclusive grip on power for more than 70 years, using a model Beijing is now trying to impart to ruling party officials from 6 African countries who also want to cement their control. The most important part of that model is imbuing revolutionary parties with the idea that they are the permanent ruling party and educating them on how to achieve that aim. Richard McGregor, senior fellow for East Asia at the Lowy Institute in Australia, told Axios. The school, which opened last year, is a partnership between the CCP and the ruling parties of Tanzania, Mozambique, Namibia, Angola, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. All 6 nations are multi party democracies, but their governing parties share another key feature. Each has ruled continuously for decades. So they're saying, in de facto, for example, let's look here. In South Africa, the ANC, the African National Congress, right, the party that famously Nelson Mandela was a part of when he came to power after apartheid ended, right? The ANC has been in power in South Africa for decades, and many people are not happy with that. I'm sure something similar is happening in Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and in Tanzania. One party sort of dominates, right? And that can be for many reasons: because of corruption, because people generally support that party, maybe because people are unaware of other parties or other options because the other parties don't have a lot of funding or backing, that sort of thing, right? And that's a different issue in itself. But what we don't want is one party rule. I think we had this already, right? I mean, many of these countries were communist back in the day. I believe Angola used to be a communist nation with a one party rule. Mozambique was a one party rule state as well, I believe, back in the Cold War era. So we don't want to see a return to that, a return to when people were killed for voicing their opposition to the government, when people were locked up in jail for years because of their opposition to the government. I don't think we want to see that in Africa. Water break. All right. So China and these six countries have long had close ties, rooted in their parallel liberation movements. The CCP has for years invited delegations from African nations to attend training sessions in Beijing and in smaller cities around the country. But the scale and scope of the school and its location outside of China, a throwback to Beijing's Soviet era strategies, mark a departure from what the CCP has previously done, experts said. The curriculum indicates the CCP is now experimenting with exporting aspects of its model, McGregor said. So, this is the first thing participants see when entering the school. It's this. By the way, Julius Nyerere is like the George Washington of Tanzania. When you go to Tanzania, if you ever get the chance to, which I highly encourage you to do, you will see a lot of images and pictures of Julius Nyerere everywhere, right? He's like the founder of the country. He was like their smartest guy, and he helped them finagle their way to independence. They didn't fight a war for independence, but they were able to wrestle politically, diplomatically, their independence away from Great Britain, right? So shout out to Julius Nyerere. He is actually a freedom fighter and a man I do respect. So, yeah, here are the 8 flags of the countries right in front of the schools here as well. All right. And yeah, we can all see them there. Let's continue. Let's keep pushing. So, conferences and short course topics at the school are taught by Chinese teachers affiliated with party schools in China. In Tanzania, they teach party governance, party discipline, anti corruption methods, Xi Jinping thought, and poverty alleviation. African staff who operate the school give lectures and short courses on topics including Pan Africanism, nationalism, and public sector enterprise management. Together, they share lessons from their revolutionary history. The school's offerings are made available to rising young members of the ruling parties, but not to politicians from opposition parties. That's not fair. That's not right. You should give every school, you should give every school of thought, every political party the opportunity. Just because somebody's in power, you're going to say, okay, because they're in power, they have the divine rights, the mandate from God to remain in power forever. So let's teach them all our communist Chinese tactics to remain in power forever. And I don't think that's cool. Once again, guys, the main thing we have to focus on here is why they are doing this. Why they are doing this. They're not doing this because they like Africans. They're not doing this because they want to see Africa become rich and prosperous and more prosperous than China. No, it's all about money. They said this at the very beginning of the article. China wants to create one party states, one party governments, just like what's in China, because they will be friendly to them and they will get lucrative trade deals on all the uranium, gold, diamonds, platinum, whatever can be found under the African soil. They're not doing this because they think they have a better way for Africa moving forward. Let's get this out of our heads. Black people across the world have no friends from any other groups. Period. Period. Why? Because, as we said before, on Chinese social media, there is so much anti Black racism that Human Rights Watch had to put out a report on that. Think about that, man. Think about that. So much anti Black racism in China, Human Rights Watch had to say, yo, this is a problem. This is a problem. So let's not get it confused ever that China cares about Black people, wants to see Africa succeed at all. What they're trying to do here is more destabilization of Africa, more neo-colonialism in Africa. And that's what we're all fighting against, right? Let's continue. All right. So if you are upholding one political party and not offering support to the whole political system, you're offering to strengthen one party within a country. You're nurturing authoritarianism. That is political interference, said Anne Marie Brady, a political scientist at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand who specializes in China's foreign relations and political influence. So here's satellite imagery of the school in 2015 and during construction in 2019 from Google Earth. Let's go. The school, located on a large swath of land 30 miles outside of Dar es Salaam, was funded by a $40 million donation provided by the CCP Central Party School, which trains China's top party officials and built by Chinese construction company. Its campus is vast, complete with a large banquet hall, gyms, tennis courts, and more than 300 hotel-style rooms with Chinese-made furniture. Like many projects in Tanzania, it's named after Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first leader after it gained independence from Britain in the early 1960s. Nyerere is widely revered as the country's founding father. The first major training conference for about 120 participants from all seven parties, including the CCP, was held in 2022, and a second major conference with about 170 attendees was held in June this year. There have also been smaller conferences and short courses specifically for members of Tanzania's ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, CCM, right? So, yeah, it sounds like China is really pouring heavy into this. And I have to say this $400 million, $40 million, not even $400 million. Wow. $40 million is enough for Black people in the diaspora to pull together so that we can get our own course on Pan Africanism, create our own school. I believe that we in the diaspora, and this is why I talk about Africa so much on my channel, is that we in the diaspora do need to make investments in Africa. Whether you want to live in Africa or not, whether we see ourselves with the Pan African ideal, or whether we see ourselves having national affinities that we are fond of. For example, you really like Kenya or you really like South Africa, whatever it is, we need to be investing in Africa and not letting other groups like the Chinese do this, right? $40 million is enough for a few Black Americans to put together to try to develop something in Africa, for us to try to gain political influence in Africa. If we really want to see a Pan African project happen, we need to put our money where our mouth is as well. But not me, because I'm broke. I'm a broke English teacher and a struggling YouTuber. No, for real though. I spent a lot of money in Africa during my trips in Mauritius, Tanzania, during the times I lived in Tunisia, all the months in Kenya, spent thousands and thousands of dollars in Africa, man. And yeah, like I said, I'm a broke English teacher, but even I still, feel like we could do more. And I wish I could do more. But hopefully, by speaking out against stuff like this, against China's authoritarian push in Africa, we can make a change. And listen, I know a lot of these people here mean well. A lot of these young African leaders or future leaders mean well. When I look at this picture, I see beautiful Black people. I'm not disparaging them at all, but I am disparaging this person right here, obviously sent by the Chinese, to influence this next generation to not value things like uh, uh, multi-ethnic democracies, multi democracies with different points of view within them, multi-party systems, that sort of thing. That's what's important, right? Like, we don't want to see Africa slide back into the age of one party rule and that sort of thing. All right. So the Tanzanian principal of the school, Marcelina Mavula Chigoriga, declined to speak to Axios on the record during a visit to the school, and declined Axios' request to observe training sessions and interview staff and participants. The CCP and political parties in Africa learn from each other on governance experience and support each other's development path that suits respective national conditions. We don't seek to export our system, Lu Pengyu, spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., told Axios in a statement. The CCP is the central leading force for all endeavors and causes in China. It is the fundamental reason why the Chinese people and Chinese nation were able to transform their fates in modern times and achieve the great success we see today. Come on now, we know this is propaganda from the embassy in DC. Basically, they're going to say, the CCP is in control of everything. Well, if that's the case, I would ask this guy, Lu Pengyu, is the CCP really in charge of TikTok, as the American politicians have been claiming? As you guys know, for the past few months, American politicians have been trying to get TikTok in America to sell because they say the Chinese Communist Party controls TikTok and they can see what's inside TikTok, Americans' user data, right? But then China replies, no, 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 we're not related to the CCP. We're totally a separate entity. But then in this same sentence, in the same statement, you're saying the CCP is the central leading force for all endeavors and causes in China. And it is a fundamental reason why the Chinese people and Chinese nation were able to transform, et cetera, et cetera. So is TikTok a leading force of the endeavor of TikTok? Right? Is China a leading force in the endeavor of TikTok? You know what I mean? So I think it's the same. I think we know without saying that them spending all this money and resources to develop this school and train the ruling parties of these African countries, that they're trying to keep them in power and create countries that will be sympathetic towards them. By the way, I should have pulled this up, but there are interesting articles about the billions of dollars of Chinese investment and how it's actually not going towards the economies of these African nations. How, once again, the wealth is being put in and sucked right out of Africa by the same people that put it in, right? So let's continue. Tanzania's CCM did not respond to a request for comment. Water break. Let's go. What they're saying. Wonderful lessons. The African ruling party officials Axios spoke with said they're enthusiastic about what the CCP is teaching at the school. Colin Njapuya, Colin N. That's all I'm going to say. An official in Namibia's ruling party, SWAPO, who attended the June training, said he hoped to implement several wonderful lessons taught by an instructor from the CCP Central Party School, especially the fusion of party and government. Though Namibia is a multi party democracy, SWAPO has governed since the country won independence from South Africa in 1990. In recent years, SWAPO has made moves to grab more power, including pushing through its own appointees to lead the government's anti corruption agency. Look at the Communist Party of China and the way they are working, said this guy, Mr. N, who works as a district coordinator for Namibia's Okakara district. They are working hard in hand with the government. That's one of the very important aspects that we need also to work on in Namibia and also in other African sister parties. Listen, man, we got to keep it real. A lot of African leaders might be trying to go here just to soak up information, just to soak up game, which is fine. You can sit down with somebody who you totally disagree with and build with them and chop it up and learn something from them. Because even in a pig's mouth, there's a diamond, right? A broken clock is right twice a day. All those cliches and that sort of thing. So of course, I don't say don't go to this school or don't get information from China. I just think that we need to take what's good from this education and then leave it. And unfortunately, a lot of what the Chinese Communist Party is going to put out there is something that we should leave, right? A lot of African leaders look at China and say, probably, well, look at this country that used to be backward, rural, underdeveloped. Many of our countries are the same. What do they have going on that we can learn from? Which is fair and understandable as well. Absolutely true. That's what people should be doing, taking the best from what you see others doing. But we have to realize that China has an advantage, billions of people within one nation. And controlling them with an iron fist does give you the advantage to direct things that need to be done. That's what Stalin did, right? He ruled the country with an iron fist and forced Russia, the Soviet Union at that time, into modernization. The Chinese Communist Party came in power and they forced China to modernize and to develop and that sort of thing. The United States of America did the same thing, imported millions of black bodies, millions of a lot of black people. I think the total amount of black people that were imported into the United States was about 500,000 or something like that. But still, imported thousands of black people and then bred millions of them, even worse, right? Put them in breeding farms, right? And forced that country to modernize and develop and that sort of thing. Do we really want to go that route, Africa? Do we really want to put our own people in bondage, in state capture, just to develop and grow? Is that really the way forward? I think there is a better way. That's what I'm saying. So let's continue. During the training, the CCP Central Party School instructor emphasized that party discipline should be above and outside the law, Mr. N said. China's system features a corresponding party official for important government positions, provincial governor, mayor, university president, and others throughout the entire system. The party position is superior to the government position, conveying party directives and guidance, which the corresponding government official then implements. That type of system, originally developed by Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin and adopted by the CCP, translates into tighter party control over the state and eliminates checks and balances on the party's power. In China, the CCP's Discipline Commission has sweeping powers to detain, interrogate, investigate, and even torture party members. While all political parties enforce behavior, the Leninist approach to party discipline is different from parties in liberal democratic systems, said McGregor, author of the book The Party, The Secret World of China's Communist Rulers. In the case of Chinese officials, the law doesn't touch them until the party has dealt with them. The law and the courts come after the party. Ain't that? No, that's not what we want, man. That's not what we want. We don't want a system where a group of people That's basically a clan. That's basically a mob. Like what they're describing now, I never knew China's system really works like this, but how they're describing it is like a clan and or how a mob would run an organization. You're telling me if I commit a crime, the party is gonna deal with me first. They might put me in party jail. They might give me the party's corporal punishment or that sort of thing before I go in front of a civil court. That's not right. That's not right. Once again, the reason that this is important is because black people around the world should be encouraging freedom, liberty for all black people. And what China is pushing in Africa, as well as stealing the resources of Africa, just like the other neo-colonial Western European powers, just like them, they're trying to distort and create a system that will be sympathetic towards them so they can continue to loot the resources out of Africa. And for anybody who thinks China is our friend, China urged to tackle online racism targeting black people. Don't ever get it confused. Don't ever get it confused that black people have friends around the world. We don't. We're in this by ourselves because everywhere around the world that I've traveled to and that we've researched and talked about on this channel, they have anti-black views ingrained in them. I am serious, guys. There's so much anti-black racism in China. Human Rights Watch had to say, whoa. Let's continue. So, Mr. N said it's very important for SWAPO to implement this style of party-state relations at the grassroots level. We have to work hand in hand, the political party and the government. In a report for SWAPO that Mr. N wrote about after completing the party training in June and viewed by Axios, he promised to take out tigers, swat flies, and hunt down foxes in Namibia, using terms the CCP has used to describe Xi's sweeping anti-corruption crackdown, which he used to both fight graft and take down political rivals, consolidating his power. Namibia's SWAPO did not provide comment before publication of this story. So here are some pictures here. A conference participant speaks during a training session. Conference participants hold the flag of Tanzania's ruling party, CCM, and the flag of Mozambique's ruling party, Frelimo. Yeah, so I believe I saw this flag when I was in Tanzania. I believe there's a picture on my channel under one of my philosophy documents where I take a picture in front of these things. And one of the interesting things about Africa, the parties sort of, you know, put a flag or a monument or some sort of symbol to say that they have control of that area. You know, for me, coming from America, that's very different and new. One of the most interesting things about traveling the world over these past few years is seeing how different countries practice democracy or practice governance. Like, for example, when I was in Turkey during the election time, the people ride around in big vans with the faces of the candidates plastered on the side, and they play patriotic music from on top of the vans, and people speak on loudspeakers why their candidate is the best and why you need to go vote for them and that sort of thing, right? In America, we don't really do that. We just have big banners and billboards and a lot of advertising on TV and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, when I was in Tanzania, I saw this flag. I think there's a picture of it on my channel. Shout out to anybody that can find it. There's a picture of me sitting in front of this on my channel in one of my philosophy videos. And that's different, right? You wouldn't see the Democrats or the Republicans put up a banner in Wisconsin, right? Like that's different. And I'm not saying one system is better or not, but what is better is freedom for black people, right? Not authoritarian rule. Let's go. So, zoom in. A fragile democracy at risk. Members of ruling parties may admire China's model, but Tanzania's largest opposition party, Chadema, worries it would further weaken the country's fragile democracy. Tanzania has a multi-party system on paper, but the ruling CCM party has managed to maintain its grip on power for decades, and in recent years experimented with a more hardline authoritarianism. China's governance model would hurt Tanzania, said Reginald Munisi, the director of strategies for Chadema. Opposition party rallies were banned for 6 years under the previous president, John Magufuli, whose hardline approach demonstrated that Tanzania's constitution and other legal rights protections weren't strong enough to prevent the country's slide away from democracy. In the past 5 years, several journalists have disappeared or have been detained or murdered. A leading member of Chadema survived an assassination attempt in 2017. The murder, the torture, the imprisonment of journalists should never be tolerated under any circumstances, not at all, period. And once again, people are going to say China has a very good model, right? Within China, there are about there are a lot of different ethnic groups. A lot of people think of China just as Han people, right? What we think of as Chinese people. But there are different groups of people like the Uyghurs, like the Tibetans, and that sort of thing. I haven't been to China. I'm not an expert on China, but I do know that China is not just one big monolith of Asian people, right? Tanzania is the same. In fact, Tanzania is probably the most diverse country I've ever visited. Within Tanzania, there are hundreds of languages spoken, hundreds of ethnic groups. By and large, people speak Swahili and they all look black. But deep down inside, there are different tribes and different groups of people there. China maintains its rule by pushing one ethnic group as the majority. While the Han do have a sizable number of people in the majority in China, they still minimize the other ethnic groups there. Do we want the same for that in Africa, the most diverse place in the world? Do we really want Tanzania to say we are a Swahili state, a Swahili people, and that sort of thing? There is that in Tanzania to some extent because Swahili is the national language and everybody spoke it and that sort of thing. But do we really want to see that push where other ethnic groups, other religions, other languages are pushed to the side in China? No, that's not what we want in China, not in China, in Africa. Do you get what I'm saying here? That's not what we want here. Let's continue. When asked if he is concerned that the CCP may be teaching CCM ways to strengthen its grasp on power, Munisi said, "It's not just a fear. I think it's almost an unspoken fact." Though Munisi didn't present clear evidence to back this up, he pointed to CCM's previous crackdown on political rights as an example of how the ruling party is interested in entrenching its power through any means possible. The CCP's claim that it shares the values of African liberation movements doesn't make sense, Munisi told Axios. China is market driven, but very strictly controlled when it comes to politics and individual liberty, he said. The liberation of an individual cannot just be economic. The liberation of an individual has to be complete, political, economic, and their social beliefs and thoughts. Absolutely. The CCP's promotion of party state fusion from the centers of power down to local governance can dismantle democracy, Mattingly said. If you have some of these countries copying what the Chinese Communist Party does at the grassroots, it's definitely an authoritarian model of how to run a large decentralized country like Tanzania. Lufonyo Hussein, a Tanzanian public servant who leads training sessions at the school, said he believes party state fusion will be good for Tanzania. Hussein said Chinese teachers at the school give lessons about how state party fusion has helped them to reach the level of development they have reached. Still, Hussein said, it's not an approach we just adopt. Nyerere founded the country on a policy of non-alignment, meaning Tanzania has long maintained strong relationships with both Western and Eastern countries, and that Tanzania's leaders can pick and choose different pieces of different governance models, blending them into a mixed system, he said. If you're talking about a security agenda, where can I get it the best? If you are looking into economic agenda, where can I get it the best? Hussein said, it's just a menu. It's just a choice. Well, there are some things on the menu that are poisonous, and authoritarianism, anti-freedom, that's not what we want in Africa. So zoom out. The Chinese model faces challenges. The CCP's model may be hard to implement in Africa, experts say. I think it's pretty difficult to exert such control the way the CCP does, because a lot of these parties operate in countries that label themselves democracies. Bao Guandin, the University of Cape Town scholar, said, it's difficult when you have that label, how far you can push the boundaries in the name of political stability, order, and not kind of impede on citizens' freedoms and rights. I think he's trying to not talk about the elephant in the room. It would almost be impossible for any African nation right now to implement control, social control, the way China does, because a lot of these places have electricity outages. When I was in Tanzania, there were hours of the day, 8, 10 hours, where there would be no electricity. There's hardly any internet. People are still using cash and that sort of thing. You can't do something like the social credit system like they have in China, or cameras everywhere on every corner, or monitor people's monetary movements in a society that can barely keep the lights on, like Tanzania, right? I think if China really does want to help Africa, which we know they don't, they would do something about the energy grid problem in South Africa. They would do something about food insecurity in parts of Tanzania and in Kenya. They would actually do something to help fight back against extremism, but not send this sort of extremist ideology of one party rule in Africa. That's not right. So let's go here. The CCP is also contending with Western democracies that have been exercising their own soft power on the continent for decades. The United States, Denmark, Germany, and other countries have been training political parties across the region for decades, aiming to strengthen multi party systems and political participation to bolster democracy there. Now, listen, some people are going to say, you have no criticism for Western democracies. You think everything from the West is right. You think white is right, Simon. Go back to America. I know you're thinking that. I know you're thinking that right now. Not at all. Not at all. The US has plenty of problems. I've heard that Denmark actually has a decent system. Germany's system is okay. But the US has a lot of problems. I'm not saying that African countries need to copy and paste the US Constitution and their models or Western democracy models. Not at all. I said at the very beginning of this video, and I'll say it again, time and time again, there is an argument to be made that Western democracy, Western style liberal representative democracy, whatever you want to call it, is not the ideal system for Africans or certain African nations. I can understand that. But what is not okay under any circumstance at all is the idea that Black people do not deserve to have civil liberties and freedom. Period. If you guys are still supporting coups in Burkina Faso or Niger and Mali and thinking that's the way we're going to liberate Black people, go jump off the tallest cliff. If you think one party rule from Chinese dictators, authoritarians, is the way for Black people to receive liberation, go swim to the bottom of the ocean. I wish I could curse, man, but y'all get what I'm trying to say here. This is not the way. It is not the way. There is another way. We have to find that way. We have to forge that way. We have to do actually what Julius Nyerere said. Julius Nyerere said that we need to take what's good from different parts. But what's not good is one party rule where people are thrown in jail just for being reporters or speaking out against the government. Not okay. And what's also not okay is like what happens in the United States where big corporations are able to buy influence with politicians. That's not okay. All right? There are good things and bad things in every system, but the Chinese system, by and large, has a lot of bad in it. And once again, guys, China is not our friend. China urged to tackle online racism targeting Black people. It's so endemic in China, anti-Black racism, that Human Rights Watch had to put out a report on it. Think about that, man. So, party training offered by Democratic governments emphasized leadership transitions after elections. Centel Barnes, the president, program director in Tanzania for the International Republican Institute, a U.S. nonprofit funded by the U.S. government, told Axios that IRI's party training in Tanzania includes a focus on going from winning to governing. This includes capacity building courses on how to prepare for elections and how to handle peaceful transitions of power after elections, including how to accept an election loss. Democratic led training programs also emphasize the importance of press freedom, rule of law, and other liberal values. CCP led training, by contrast, has promoted the benefits of China's propaganda and censorship regimes. McGregor added that at the end of the day, it's a contest of systems. China now thinks its system has lessons for the world. This is, on paper, what the US is pushing here is mostly something that I can agree with, because what is the opposite? The opposite is undermining a democratic system if you lose. For example, like what Donald Trump is doing. Donald Trump, because he's a sore loser, a baby, a grown man who never developed, because he lost, he has to say the election was stolen, it was rigged, they cheated. Just not the fact that he actually sucks and nobody likes him and nobody wants to be around him. You get what I'm saying here? The CCP is training African leaders to do the same. If they can't win, they're going to undermine the system. I'm reading between the lines here. I know it doesn't explicitly say that, but what else is the other option? You're going from winning to governing, but nobody can win all the time. Just like how I'm losing in this live stream right now because nobody's in here. But I'm going to keep it real. Everybody takes wins and losses, and we grow and develop, and we learn from our mistakes. A political system should do the same as well. You win some, you lose some, you grow and develop. Ideally, on paper, we know politics can be corrupt. We know systems can be corrupted, but this authoritarian system pushed by China has a lot of issues, and it's not going to lead to Black liberation, right? There's no way a country that has so much online hatred towards Black people could ever be a savior for us, no matter what their model is. The model is within us, within Black people, right? So Between the lines, Beijing's new exports. Again, the school's approach echoes Mao era policies promoting China as a model to the developing world, but it has key differences. In the 1950s and 60s, the CCP supported communist revolutionary movements abroad, seeking to spread its ideology and communist economic policies, including to Tanzania. That support ended after reforms began in 1978. Beijing shifted its focus from party to party cooperation towards diplomacy between states. Here's a picture of Julius Nyerere and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai in 1968. Wow. Now the CCP is back to exporting a political model. This time, the idea that a single ruling party should dominate the state at every level, but without the ideology heavy economic policies of the CCP's earlier decades. It's like back to the Mao era policies again, that China is a model to the developing world, Brady said. Except these aren't revolutionary parties, they are authoritarian parties in power within a nominal democratic system. What to watch? The future of China's model in Africa, it's unclear if and how far the ruling parties that receive the training at the school will go in implementing China's model. Beijing's efforts to create a bloc of like minded partners for long term economic benefits and geopolitical influence have already seen dividends. China is the largest trading partner for numerous African nations and receives strong support from across the continent at the United Nations. What we see in Tanzania is about building something, McGregor told Axios. It's anew. So this article is from Axios. It's in the description of the video. I want to thank everybody who watched today, and I'll end with my final words. All right. So once again, we as Black people, whether we're from the diaspora or from the continent, I highly encourage us to travel, to go abroad and visit places like Tanzania. Going to Tanzania was one of the most transformative experiences of my life, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat and wouldn't change much. Maybe a few things. But regardless, this is what we need to do. We always need to advocate for Black people to have freedom, justice, equality, and not get influenced by other people who have nefarious motives. Let's keep it a buck. China is not Black people's friend. They're not Africa's friend. There are no friends in geopolitics. There are only interests. And China has an interest in Africa and its resources and its human capital and people. We've seen countless examples of Black people being abused in China, of anti-Black racism being everywhere in China, and we need to do something about that. We need to do something about that. And what do we need to do about that? Advocate for ourselves, not just depend on handouts from China, billions of dollars of loans from China, and that sort of thing. So I'll end it there. Thank you, everybody, for watching, whether you are in the live stream, real silent today, or whether you're going to watch this on the playback. We're going to try to do these live streams all the time. We're going to blow this channel up. We're going to keep it real, keep on providing information. All the articles are in the description, and see y'all tomorrow. Peace.